Chicago greeted her with rain. Lily stood at the bus stop with one suitcase and a diploma in her backpack, watching the drops hit the gray asphalt. She hadn't brought an umbrella. Back home in Cloverfield, you could always predict the weather. The morning sky would tell you what the evening would bring. Here, the sky told you nothing. Here, there was barely any sky at all. Just glass and concrete, and more glass and more concrete, stretching all the way to the horizon. But Lily was smiling. She had waited a long time for this moment. Little Cloverfield with its one main street and everyone knowing everyone. It was cozy, but it wasn't enough. She wanted more. She had always wanted more. Top grades in school, a scholarship, years of relentless studying. All of it had brought her here, wet, with a suitcase, with a smile, to begin her real life. Her first stretch of time in Chicago was like climbing a mountain, hard but thrilling. She joined a small law firm as an associate attorney's assistant. The work was demanding and thankless. Mountains of documents, late evenings, clients who called early in the morning. But she was learning. She absorbed everything like a sponge. The senior colleagues noticed her, watched how she worked, and nodded to each other. And then came Ryan. He appeared in her life the way everything in Chicago did, sharply and without warning. A senior partner at the firm, a brilliant attorney, a man who knew how to walk into a room and make everyone feel it immediately. He began paying attention to her. First work-related questions, then coffee after a meeting, then dinner. Lily had no experience with men like him. Back in Cloverfield, there had been boys she went to the movies with, or to school dances. Ryan was from a different world, confident, dazzling, where everything happened fast and bright. She fell in love the way you only fall once in a lifetime. Completely without reservation, without protection. She gave him everything she had, her time, her attention, her dreams, her heart. And then, one evening, he invited her to a restaurant. She arrived in a new dress, with a light heart. He sat across from her and began to speak, evenly, carefully, the way one speaks in a courtroom. That it had been a wonderful time, that she was wonderful, that he wasn't ready for something serious. Standard words, cold and correct, like a legal document. Lily walked out of the restaurant and stopped on the street. Chicago roared around her. Cars, people, neon signs, rain that had started again. A storm in the city and a storm inside, and she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The weeks that followed, she tried to hold herself together. She came to work. She sat at her desk. She looked at documents and couldn't see the words. She went out into the city and felt as though all that concrete and glass was pressing in on her. From every side, from above, from below. She had always thought the city's rhythm inspired her. Now it was suffocating her. One morning she came into the office, sat down at her desk, looked at the stack of folders, and understood that she couldn't. She simply couldn't anymore. She wrote her resignation letter that same day, and that evening she called her mother. "Mom, I'm coming home." A pause. "When?" "Tomorrow." Cloverfield greeted her with sunshine. It was April, and everything around her was waking up after winter. The apple trees along the main street were just beginning to open their first white petals. The lilac bush by the old library was coming into color, not yet in bloom, but already faintly fragrant, full of quiet promise. And the sky, a real sky, wide and blue, without a single cloud. Her mother hugged her tightly and asked nothing. That was the kindest thing she could have done. For a while, Lily slept, long and dreamlessly, the deep, still sleep of someone who had been running for a long time and had finally stopped. Her mother brought tea and left it outside the door. She didn't disturb her. One morning, Lily woke early. It wasn't yet 6, and couldn't fall back asleep. She stepped out into the backyard in her pajamas and stood barefoot on the grass. Her mother's garden. She hadn't seen it in a long time. She had visited rarely and briefly. Now she stood in the middle of it and looked slowly around. The roses along the fence were just unfurling their first leaves, tender and bright green. The flower beds with peonies, lush, dark green, no buds yet. The old lilac in the corner was finally beginning to open, and the hydrangeas, her mother had planted them when Lily was small, had grown into magnificent, full bushes, not yet in bloom but already thick and alive. Lily bent down and touched the earth. The soil was damp and warm from the morning sun. It smelled the way only earth smells, alive, real, deep. Something in her chest released. She didn't know how long she had been holding that tension. Perhaps the whole time she was in Chicago. Perhaps even longer. She picked up a small trowel that lay near the flower bed and began to dig. Without a plan, without a purpose. Just digging. Loosening the soil between the bushes. Clearing away last year's leaves. Hands in the earth. Sun on her back. Silence all around. Only birds. And somewhere in the distance, a tractor in a field. Her mother came out with 2 cups of coffee and stopped, surprised. "You're already in the garden." "I woke up," Lily answered without turning around. Her mother paused. She set one of the cups on the fence beside her and went back inside. Lily worked until noon. That was how her new life began. She hadn't planned to become a gardener. She hadn't planned anything at all. She simply came out to the garden every morning and did what needed doing. Watered, loosened the soil, pruned, replanted. She read books about plants. First one, then another, then ordered an entire stack. And she discovered she had a gift. It became clear gradually. At first, she simply noticed that the plants in her mother's garden had started growing differently after her return. Faster, more generously, more vividly. Her mother would look at the hydrangeas and shake her head. They had never bloomed so abundantly before. One in particular, pink and cream, with large, full clusters that slowly deepened to a richer pink as summer progressed. Lily simply called her the pink one, and she became the first in the large family of hydrangeas that Lily would grow with her own hands. Then the neighbor, Mrs. Collins, brought her geranium, nearly dead, yellowed, with fallen leaves. I don't know what's wrong with it. Nothing helps. Lily took the pot, looked at it carefully, repotted it in different soil, moved it to a different spot, and added something of her own, a solution she had prepared from a book. A week later, the geranium stood like new. Word spread through the town. Soon, people began coming to her with plants. Someone with a dried-out orchid, someone else with a sickly ficus. She never refused, and in 9 cases out of 10, the plant came back to life. Once, she snapped off a hydrangea cutting, dry, nearly dead, and absent-mindedly pushed it into the soil by the fence. She forgot about it. A month later, she saw it had taken root. It had put out new growth. It was beginning to grow. "You have special hands," her mother said. "Just attention," Lily replied. But she thought to herself that it wasn't only attention. It was that she understood plants. She could feel where the problem was, what needed to change. Only here, it brought her joy, not exhaustion. In time, she rented a small greenhouse on the edge of town. Then she bought a plot of land and built a nursery. Small, modest, but hers. She grew hydrangeas, different varieties, different colors. White panicle hydrangeas that stood like candles and bloomed from summer all the way to late autumn. Large round pink ones, deep burgundy ones with velvety clusters, and one special variety, Fraise Melba, whose blooms started white and slowly took on a strawberry pink hue as the season progressed. People came from neighboring towns just to buy her. Lily's flower beds became known throughout the area. The combinations of colors, shapes, heights. She could feel how plants should stand beside each other to bring out the best in one another. She created small living masterpieces. "Even dead things come alive in your hands," her mother said. Lily looked at a small new cluster and said nothing, but something warm stirred inside her. Years passed. Lily woke at 5 in the morning, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. While the town was still asleep, she was already in the garden, coffee in one hand, watering can in the other. The morning round. That's what she called it. Every bush, every flower bed, every new shoot. Her nursery had grown. Several greenhouses, a large open plot, a small shop at the entrance where she sold flowers and seedlings and bouquets. She arranged herself. 2 assistants, a young woman named Sarah and an older man, Mr. Jones, who knew more about soil than anyone in the county. Old friends called from Chicago. "Lily, when are you finally coming back to a normal life?" "I have a normal life," she would answer. "But you studied so hard. Don't you regret it?" She thought about it sometimes, especially when letters came from old classmates. Someone had made partner at a big firm. Someone had moved to New York. She would read them and wait for a feeling of envy or regret. It never came. Instead, in the mornings, she would walk into the garden and watch the sun rise over the hydrangeas and feel something that no career in Chicago had ever given her. Stillness, fullness, the sense of being exactly where she was meant to be. There were men, too. Cloverfield was a small town. Everyone knew everyone. Someone would invite her for coffee, someone else for dinner. She would go, once, twice. She would talk, smile, be polite, and come home feeling as though nothing had happened. Her mother would sometimes look at her with quiet worry. "Lily, you can't spend your whole life." "Mom," she would interrupt softly. "I'm fine. You're closed off since you came back. You've been closed off." Lily said nothing. She knew her mother was right, but she also knew that openness came at a price. That when you opened yourself, you could end up with Chicago. Concrete and glass and rain, and a man looking at you across a table, saying the right words to tell you it was over. Her garden didn't betray her. Plants didn't leave. They grew. If you tended them, if you loved them, if you gave them time. People were a different matter. One June morning, she was deadheading the hydrangeas along the fence. The sun had just risen, the air had not yet warmed, and dew glistened on the large, full clusters. Fraise Melba was already beginning to take on her particular strawberry pink shade. One more week, and she would be in full bloom. Lily worked methodically, from bush to bush. This was her meditation. The best start to a day she knew. She didn't notice someone had stopped on the other side of the fence. "Excuse me." She startled and turned sharply. On the other side of the fence stood a man, in a simple shirt with a notebook under his arm. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the hydrangeas, with the expression of someone who has seen something unexpected and cannot look away. "Excuse me," he said again, and looked at her. "I was walking past, and I saw—" He nodded toward the flowers. "This is extraordinary." Lily straightened up. She held her pruning shears a little tighter. "Can I help you with something?" He looked slightly flustered. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm a writer. I've stopped in town for a while, looking for a quiet place to finish a book. I was walking past, and I suddenly saw your garden, and I simply couldn't walk on." Lily looked at him, calmly, assessingly. Cloverfield was a small town. Strangers were rare. "Mr. Cole," she said evenly, "if you'd like to buy flowers, the nursery opens at 9. He looked surprised. He had clearly expected a different response. "Yes, perhaps, but I also wanted to ask, who grew these hydrangeas? I've never seen a color like this." "I grew them," she replied shortly. "At 9. And she turned back to her flowers. He came at 9. Lily saw him from the greenhouse. He was standing near the entrance to the little shop, studying the potted plants outside. He looked carefully. Not the way a customer looks, but the way someone looks when they're genuinely interested. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. "You came." "I said I would," he replied simply. He bought a large fraise melba in a pot, full and lush. He paid and asked questions at the same time. Where this variety came from, how to care for it, why the clusters changed color. The questions were intelligent, not the questions of someone trying to impress, but of someone who genuinely wanted to know. Lily answered briefly, but she noticed he was listening, really listening, remembering, occasionally writing something in his notebook. "You're taking notes about hydrangeas?" she asked, surprised. "I write down everything that seems important to me," he said. "You never know what will come in useful." "For the book?" "For the book, for life." He smiled, and there was no flirtation in that smile, only sincerity. "My heroine loves flowers, but I know nothing about them. Now I'll know a little more." Lily smiled in spite of herself. "Your heroine is a gardener?" "She became one." He looked at her. "After city life broke her." A pause. Lily felt something tighten in her chest, lightly, barely noticeably. "That's a good subject for a book," she said evenly. "I think so too." He agreed, and said nothing more. He came back every week, not every day. Not so often that it felt intrusive. Once a week, sometimes twice. He would buy something. Seedlings, a bouquet, a pot of herbs. And he always asked questions. About plants, about the garden, about how she had learned to understand flowers. Lily answered, briefly at first, then at more length. She didn't notice exactly when she began to look forward to his questions. He didn't ask the way people usually did, not about facts, but about feelings. How do you know when a plant is struggling? What do you feel when something doesn't take? Do you ever miss the pace of city life? At the last question, she paused. Sometimes, she answered honestly. But it's like missing a storm, beautiful from a distance, frightening from the inside. He wrote that down in his notebook. May I use that in the book? Those are my words. I know. That's why I'm asking. She looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, she looked at a man not with caution, but simply. She saw that he was tired, not from today, but from something deeper, that behind that easy smile, there was something heavy, that he was searching for something too. You may, she said. One evening he stayed longer than usual. They sat on a bench near the nursery, she with tea, he with his notebook, and talked about the book, about Cloverfield, about why people come back home, and why some never can. And you? She asked. Do you have a home to go back to? He paused. I did, but I left it a long time ago. A pause. Sometimes I think it was a mistake. Why don't you go back? Because I'm afraid it won't be the same. That I won't be the same. Lily looked at him. Places don't change as quickly as we think, she said quietly. We change. Places wait. He looked at her for a long moment, carefully. How do you know? Cloverfield waited for me, she replied simply, and it took me back without a single question. Silence. Somewhere in the garden, the crickets were singing. The last strip of light was fading behind the trees. Lily, he said at last, may I tell you something? She turned her head. I came here to write a book. That's true, but I'm staying. And it's not only because of the book anymore. She said nothing. I don't want to frighten you, he continued. And I understand that you're careful. I see that, and I respect it. But I think it would be dishonest of me to keep coming here every week and pretend that all I need are flowers. Lily looked at her hands, at the earth under her nails that always stayed there, no matter how much she washed. Earth that had become part of her. Ethan, she said at last, I'm not very good at this. At what? At what you mean. I know, he said. I'm not very good at it either. A pause. But maybe we could try not being good at it together. She raised her head. He was looking at her, and in his eyes, there was no pressure, no expectation, just honesty. The same honesty that had been in all his questions. Something in her, something that had stood firm and still for years, like an old fence, shifted, quietly. It happened slowly, the way everything real happens. They began walking in the evenings, after the nursery closed. He would talk about the book, she would talk about the garden. Then the subjects grew broader. Childhood, dreams, mistakes, things they wished they had done differently. One evening she told him about Chicago. Not everything, but enough. About Ryan, about how she had thought she knew what love was, about how it turned out she didn't. He listened, without interrupting, without pitying her. Does it still hurt to talk about it? He asked when she finished. She thought about it. Not anymore. It hurt then. Now it's simply part of what brought me here. She looked at the dark garden. If it hadn't been for Chicago, there would be no garden like this. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best, he said quietly. Is that for the book? No, he answered. That's for us. She laughed, easily, genuinely, the kind of laugh she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. He took her hand, gently, as if asking. She didn't pull it away. They sat like that for a long time, in the darkened garden, under the stars, and nothing more needed to be said. And his book came out the following spring. On the cover were flowers, white panicle hydrangeas against a dark background. In the acknowledgments he had written, "For Lily Sain, who taught me that the most beautiful things grow from the hardest ground." She read it 3 times. Then she went out into the garden. Frace melba stood in full bloom, strawberry pink, full and lush, with a fragrance that drifted through the entire garden in the morning air. Lily touched one of the clusters. She remembered, back then, in Chicago, standing in that cold rain, thinking that it was all over, that she was broken, that coming home was defeat. But the earth knows what it's doing. You put something broken into it, and it grows something you didn't expect, something better than you had planned. She heard footsteps behind her. Ethan walked over and stopped beside her. He rested his hand on her shoulder, warmly, naturally, the way you rest your hand when you have the right to. "Did you read it?" He asked. "I did." "And?" She turned and looked at him, at the man who had come here to write a book and stayed, who had asked the right questions and waited for the right answers, who hadn't rushed, hadn't pushed, and had given her time, the same kind of time she gave her plants. "I'm glad you stopped at my fence," she said. He smiled. That same smile. "So am I." The garden stood around them, alive, warm, full of color and fragrance. It had taken her in when she came back broken. It had brought him to her when he was searching for stillness. Some places know more than we think. Some gardens grow more than flowers.